There is a theory of consciousness so disturbing that once you fully understand it, it changes the way that you see every human achievement, every ambition, every distraction, and even your own thoughts. What if consciousness is not humanity's greatest gift, but in fact our greatest evolutionary mistake? What if the very thing that we celebrate as the pinnacle of intelligence is actually a biological catastrophe destined to doom us all? To explain it, first I need to tell you a story. One night, in times long since vanished, man awoke and saw himself. He saw that he was naked under the cosmos, homeless in his own body. Everything opened up before his searching thoughts, wonder upon wonder, terror upon terror, all blossomed in his mind. Then woman awoke too, and said that it was time to go out and kill something. And man took up his bow, fruit of the union between the soul and the hand, and went out under the stars. But when the animals came to their water hole, where he out of habit waited for them, he no longer knew the spring of the tiger in his blood, but instead a great psalm to the brotherhood of suffering shared by all that lives. That day he came home with empty hands, and when they found him again by the rising of the new moon, he sat dead by the waterhole. This is the beginning of one of the saddest philosophical essays ever written. The Last Messiah, written by Norwegian philosopher Peter Wessel Zapffe, argues that humanity was never meant to become conscious in the way that we are. Evolution, blindly pushing forward without intent or wisdom, accidentally created a creature capable of understanding too much. We became aware of death, of meaninglessness, of isolation, and ultimately, the unbearable fragility of existence itself. Unlike every other animal, we can imagine the future. We can replay the past. We can recognize our own insignificance against the scale of the cosmos, and according to Zapffe, this awareness has completely destroyed us. Most animals live almost entirely in the present moment. A gazelle running from a lion experiences terror, but only while the threat exists. Once the danger disappears, that fear disappears with it. The animal returns to grazing as if nothing happened. It doesn't sit awake at night contemplating its own mortality. It doesn't wonder whether its suffering has meaning. It doesn't fear the inevitability of aging and death decades before either arrive. But humans? We do. Our minds simulate futures that don't yet exist. We imagine humiliation before it happens. We anticipate grief long before loss arrives. We build abstract identities inside of our heads and then spend our entire lives defending them. We are capable of empathy so deep that we can suffer for strangers that we have never even met. A tragedy happening on the other side of the planet can invade our consciousness and alter our emotional state instantly. We can picture billions of lives unfolding simultaneously, each one filled with struggle, loss, fear, and death. Zapffe believed this level of awareness exceeds what a biological organism can bear. He described humanity as a paradox. Nature equipped us with intelligence powerful enough to comprehend reality, but not powerful enough to escape its psychological consequences. Consciousness became an overdeveloped trait, like an evolutionary mutation that grew beyond its useful function. In the same way that certain species evolve features that eventually destroy them, humanity evolved a mind that became too aware for its own survival. Around 400,000 years ago, there lived a colossal creature known as Megaloceros giganteus, the Irish elk. It stood nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder, with antlers that stretched up to 12 feet across like the branches of a dead forest being fused onto its skull. To encounter one must have felt like witnessing evolution intoxicated by its own power. With a single violent swing of its head, the elk could batter through brush, scatter rivals, and dominate the landscape around it. For thousands of generations, nature rewarded this magnificence. Larger antlers meant greater strength. Greater strength meant survival. The elk became a monument to evolutionary success. But evolution has no sense of restraint. Slowly, over countless generations, the antlers continued growing until the very thing that once made the animal powerful began to cripple it. The forests that once bent beneath its strength became impossible to navigate. Movement slowed. Escape became harder. Survival itself became burdened by the crushing excess attached to its head. Its greatest weapon gradually transformed into its greatest obstacle. Zapfa believed that human consciousness followed the exact same path. At some point, awareness stopped being merely useful and became catastrophic. He described it as a two-sided blade without a hilt, a weapon sharp enough to cut through the fabric of reality itself, but one that is impossible to wield without you bleeding. The more I read The Last Messiah, the more one question began to haunt me. With the Irish elk, the logic is easy to understand. Bigger antlers meant greater dominance. Greater dominance meant better chances at mating. And better chances at mating meant those genes survived and spread. Evolution rewarded excess because, for a time at least, excess worked. But human consciousness feels different. The relationship between consciousness and survival isn't nearly as obvious. If self-awareness burdens us with anxiety, dread, shame, existential terror, and the knowledge of our own death, then why did it evolve at all? Why would nature produce a trait capable of making its own bearer miserable? Why create a mind that can suffer not only from pain, but from the anticipation of pain? The memory of pain, and even the abstract knowledge that pain exists at all? To answer that question, I had to look beyond Zapfa. In similar terms, much like the elk, in smaller doses, consciousness was incredibly useful. The neuroscientist Michael Graziano argues that consciousness may have evolved primarily as a social tool. By seeing other people as conscious beings with thoughts, emotions, fears, desires, humans became capable of forming stable groups. It gave us the ability to imagine what other people were thinking, which created empathy, cooperation, and social cohesion. But consciousness did something even more important than that. It gave humans the ability to imagine things that didn't physically exist. A chimpanzee can recognize members of its troop. But humans could invent entire realities inside of their own minds and then share those realities with thousands, even millions of other people. Stories, myths, gods, nations, ancestors, destiny, honor, morality, history. Suddenly, tribes were no longer held together purely by blood or immediate survival, but by shared imagination. And once that happened, human civilization exploded. A small tribe can survive through instinct and familiarity, but massive civilizations require something stranger. They require millions of people to believe in the same invisible narrative. Look around you, and you realize that almost every human group is held together by stories that people tell each other about themselves. Sometimes we call it religion. Sometimes culture, sometimes ideology, nationality, or tradition. But underneath all of them lies the same mechanism: collective imagination. Consciousness allowed human beings to mentally step into worlds that didn't physically exist yet and behave as though they were real. A flag can become a sacred icon. A holy text becomes divine provenance. A border becomes meaningful. Money becomes valuable. Entire societies emerge from shared belief systems held together inside the minds of conscious creatures. In that sense, consciousness became humanity's greatest evolutionary advantage. It allowed us to cooperate at scales no other species could approach. We could organize beyond immediate familial structures because we could collectively believe in abstract ideas. Civilization itself is built on imagined realities powerful enough to coordinate millions of strangers toward common goals. But Zapfa believed this evolutionary advantage came with a devastating cost. Once consciousness became reflective enough to examine itself, humanity encountered a devastating reality. We are temporary creatures trapped in a universe that offers no obvious meaning. Everything we love will one day disappear. Every civilization is doomed to collapse. Every human achievement eventually erodes into dust. Consciousness gave us the ability to recognize this truth, but no ability to emotionally reconcile with it. And this is where Zapfa's theory becomes darker than just ordinary pessimism. He did not believe that humans genuinely confront reality most of the time. He believed that we survive only by suppressing it. One of the biggest mysteries about consciousness is why evolution would ever create something so metabolically expensive. The human brain consumes an enormous amount of energy, and yet every major leap in human progress has really been about unlocking more energy to fuel it, learning how to farm, learning how to cook, building systems that gave our brains more power, more efficiency, and more room to think. Technology evolves in the exact same way. Every breakthrough device, every leap in computing, AI, or communication ultimately depends on one thing: better energy systems, more power, more efficiency, and smarter ways to deliver it. Because the better we become at powering our technology, the more innovation we unlock. Which is why I'm excited to partner with Anker, the sponsor of today's episode. Not long ago, chargers were basically identical, small plastic bricks designed to do one simple thing: deliver power. But modern devices demand far more than that. Laptops, phones, tablets, watches, all competing for energy all at once. And that shift has transformed charging into a surprisingly advanced piece of engineering, which we can see in this Anker Prime 160-watt charger. Anker has been leading that transformation with technologies like GaN Prime 2.0 and Power IQ 5.0. MIT Technology Review and a feature done in partnership with Anker, highlighting how charging is becoming one of the most advanced pieces of everyday engineering. Using gallium nitride architecture, Anker is able to make chargers dramatically smaller while still delivering incredibly high power output. We're talking up to 140 watts for devices small enough to fit in your pocket. MIT Technology Review specifically called out Anker's MBUC architecture, a multi-level voltage conversion system that reduces component stress and, combined with Anker's proprietary control algorithm, pushes secondary power conversion efficiency above 99.5%. At the same time, systems like ActiveShield 4.0 constantly monitor temperature over 10 million times every day to improve safety and efficiency while protecting the battery lifespan of your devices. The most interesting part about the Anker Prime 160-watt charger is its smart charging, which actively communicates with your devices, intelligently distributing power between them in real time. That's your laptop, your phone, and your headphones, all charging simultaneously using one brick, while the charger automatically adjusts output based on the needs of each device. If you'd like to check out Anker's latest lineup featuring GaN Prime 2.0 and Power IQ 5.0, click the link in the description down below. According to Zapfa, human civilization is essentially a gigantic defense mechanism built to protect us from the full weight of consciousness. Almost every structure in society exists to keep existential panic at a manageable distance. Religion, nationalism, career ambition, entertainment, status, productivity, social media, consumerism, even personal identity all function as psychological barriers shielding us from awareness of death and meaninglessness. Human beings cannot tolerate reality continuously, so we construct systems that narrow consciousness into something survivable. Zapfa identified 4 main defense mechanisms that humans unconsciously use to avoid despair. The first is isolation. This involves suppressing disturbing thoughts entirely. We push mortality, suffering, and existential fear out of awareness so we can function normally. Society depends on this suppression. Imagine trying to work a regular office job while being fully aware every second that you and everyone around you are slowly moving towards death. Imagine trying to enjoy casual conversation while vividly understanding the suffering occurring across the planet at the same moment. Most people instinctively filter these thoughts out because remaining fully conscious of them would be psychologically destabilizing. The second mechanism is anchoring, which Zapfa sometimes called attachment. Humans attach themselves to belief systems, identities, and structures that create a sense of stability. Religion gives cosmic purpose. Nations create a tribal identity. Careers provide direction. Families create emotional grounding. These anchors prevent the mind from drifting into existential chaos. Without them, consciousness becomes unbearable. The third mechanism is diversion. Humans constantly distract themselves to avoid confronting existence directly. That could be work, entertainment, your goals, social drama, endless scrolling, productivity culture, celebrity obsession, consumption, all noise. Modern civilizations create a non-stop stream of stimulation because silence leaves room for existential awareness to emerge. And finally, there's sublimation, which is basically what I've built my entire career on. The transformation of suffering into art, philosophy, literature, or intellectual expression. According to Zapfa, some individuals channel existential terror into creativity instead of suppressing it completely. The artist, the philosopher, or writer stares into the darkness and converts it into something communicable. But even this, all of this, they're still coping mechanisms. Because beneath all of it, according to Zapfa, lies a truth that humanity cannot escape. Consciousness itself is the wound. Think about that hunter that we talked about in the beginning. For millions of years, survival had depended on instinct. Hunger drove the hunt. The spear was raised, the animal would die, and the human would live. But then something changed. The hunter suddenly became conscious in a new way. Instead of seeing prey, he recognized another living being trapped in the same cycle of suffering as himself. He felt what Zapfa described as the brotherhood of suffering shared by all that lives. The boundary between the hunter and the hunted dissolved, and for the first time, empathy overpowered instinct. And so the hunter lowered the weapon. He returned home empty-handed. Eventually he starved, beside the same waterhole where he once would have killed without hesitation. Zapfa saw this as symbolic of the human condition itself. Consciousness has expanded beyond biological usefulness. Evolution has accidentally produced a creature capable of acting against its own survival because it could morally reflect on existence. Just think about it. We are the only animals who can become vegan, choosing self-denial and ethics over instinct and survival. This is what makes human consciousness unique. A lion may hesitate from fear, but not from moral guilt. A wolf doesn't become a vegan out of compassion for deer. Humans alone can deliberately override biology because we imagine the suffering of others as if it were our own. And while this empathy can appear beautiful, Zapfa believed it came with devastating consequences. The deeper consciousness becomes, the harder it is to participate naturally in life. Every action acquires a moral weight to it. Every pleasure becomes shadowed by awareness of suffering somewhere else. Every human victory exists beside another person's tragedy. The more conscious we become, the more psychologically difficult existence itself becomes. According to Zapfa, humans survive only because we have learned to regulate consciousness artificially. We constantly turn awareness up and down depending on what reality is demanding from us. Full consciousness would produce chronic pain, so the mind filters reality into manageable fragments. This filtering happens so automatically that most people never even notice it. Think about how strange everyday life actually is. Human beings wake up each morning knowing with certainty that they will die, and yet we still answer emails, we make coffee, we attend meetings, and we worry about our social status. This isn't because people are irrational, it's because consciousness itself must be constrained for life to continue. A person can't function while continuously aware of their cosmic insignificance, the inevitability of decay, and the suffering woven into existence, so the mind narrows its focus. We concentrate on tasks, routines, ambitions, entertainment, and relationships. We reduce reality into psychologically survivable pieces. Zapfa believed healthy human psychology depends on this suppression. In fact, he argued that what society calls normal behavior is actually a carefully maintained state of partial unconsciousness. Mental stability requires selectively ignoring vast portions of reality. The individual who becomes too aware risks paralysis, despair, or detachment from ordinary life. This creates an unsettling possibility. Perhaps civilization itself is built upon controlled delusion. Zapfa believed human beings possess an extraordinary capacity for empathy, but also an equally extraordinary ability to shut that empathy off. Without this compartmentalization, society couldn't function. A soldier can't fight effectively while fully experiencing the humanity of the person across from him. A corporation can't endlessly exploit their workers or ecosystems while remaining vividly conscious of all the suffering involved. Entire civilizations depend on narrowing the moral field of vision. Humans move between empathy and brutality by selectively regulating awareness. This explains one of the strangest contradictions in human behavior. The same species capable of profound compassion is also capable of genocide, torture, conquest, and cruelty on an unimaginable scale. Zapfa believed these are not contradictions at all. They are consequences of the same consciousness trying to survive itself. When awareness becomes unbearable, humans retreat into our tribal identities and abstractions. These are nationality, ideology, religion, race, politics. These systems simplify reality into categories that allow violence to become psychologically manageable. The individual no longer confronts the full moral weight of their actions because consciousness narrows around the group. And this process begins very early in life. Children quickly learn which existential questions are socially acceptable and which ones are frowned upon. We learn when to laugh, when to stay distracted, and when to suppress our own discomfort. Most conversations avoid the deepest realities entirely. Death remains hidden behind euphemisms. Suffering becomes statistical. Existential fear is medicalized, pathologized, or buried beneath entertainment. Zapfa argued that civilization functions through an unwritten agreement to protect one another from reality. But these protective structures are quite fragile. Sometimes they crack. Moments of crisis, war, isolation, grief, or existential confrontation can suddenly strip away the normal filters that keep consciousness stable. In those moments, people experience something terrifying. The realization that beneath social routines and distractions lies a deeper chaos that civilization is constantly struggling to contain. Zapfa believed one of humanity's most important defense mechanisms is ambition itself. Human beings constantly strive towards goals because yearning prevents confrontation with existential emptiness. We imagine that fulfillment exists somewhere ahead of us. It's a promotion or more money, recognition, love, achievement, purpose. The next milestone becomes psychologically necessary because staying still means facing reality. This is why the actual achievement rarely feels as good as the pursuit. It is the constant movement on the treadmill of life that we truly desire, not the destination. The moment one goal is reached, another immediately replaces it. A person spends years chasing success only to discover the satisfaction fades almost instantly. Then a new ambition appears. We want more status, more wealth, more productivity, more stimulation. Modern society interprets this as motivation or progress. Zapfa interpreted it as escape. He argued that human beings remain psychologically afloat only by keeping consciousness occupied. Think of it like an airplane. It's a massive piece of metal that, by all logic, should not remain suspended in the sky. It stays airborne only through constant forward motion. The moment the engines fail and momentum disappears, gravity immediately pulls it back to the ground in a thunderous collapse. The human mind is not built to rest for long inside the full awareness of existence. Left alone too completely, consciousness begins drifting towards terrifying questions. Questions of death, meaninglessness, isolation, and suffering. The fragile, temporary nature of everything we love. So, to remain psychologically stable, the mind must keep moving. It must stay occupied with goals, ambitions, entertainment, routines, distractions, social drama, work, noise. Forward motion is existential survival. This is why stillness can feel strangely unbearable. Why you often get a lot more depressed when you're lying awake at 2 a.m. in silence. Your defenses are weak, and the mind begins circling existential questions it normally keeps submerged beneath all this activity. According to Zapfa, civilization itself functions like the engines of that airplane. Society generates a continuous stream of distractions to keep consciousness suspended above despair. And modern technology has amplified this mechanism to unprecedented levels. Human attention has become the most valuable economic resource on Earth because these companies know that distraction itself is necessary for survival. Unfortunately, humanity mistakes perpetual stimulation for fulfillment, while drifting further away from genuine confrontation with our own existence. Zapfa believed this endless pursuit of distraction becomes most visible among the wealthy and powerful. From the outside, immense wealth appears to promise freedom, happiness, and fulfillment. But if consciousness itself is the problem, then material success can't solve it. It can only delay confrontation with it. A human being can only eat one meal at a time, only sleep in one bed, only occupy one room at any given moment. Beyond a certain point, wealth stops serving practical needs and becomes something psychological instead. It expands the range of possible distraction. The billionaire, the celebrity, the ruler, the powerful executive, what they are truly purchasing isn't power, but insulation from existential awareness. Wealth creates endless opportunities for stimulation. Every new experience temporarily fills that void in our consciousness and keeps despair at a distance. But the effect fades. What once felt extraordinary soon becomes ordinary. The mind recalibrates itself almost immediately, and then satisfaction evaporates. Then stronger distraction becomes necessary. And this creates a constant cycle of escalation. The wealthy often drift towards increasingly extreme experiences because ordinary pleasures lose their power to occupy consciousness. That's why you see a lot of rich and powerful people doing the most depraved things that you can imagine. Zapfa referred to this collapse as something resembling spleen, a state of spiritual exhaustion where distraction no longer functions. The person surrounded by abundance suddenly confronts the terrifying realization that none of it has solved the underlying problem. Modern psychology calls this hedonic adaptation. Human beings consistently return to an emotional baseline regardless of the intense emotions, whether they are negative or positive, that they experience. Extraordinary gains lose their emotional impact over time, and the new reality becomes normal. Zapfa recognized this decades earlier and interpreted it as evidence that human desire is fundamentally structured around avoidance rather than fulfillment. He argued that the intensity of yearning matters more than the object being pursued. The chase itself protects consciousness from stillness. A promotion from private to corporal can feel more psychologically significant than advancement from lieutenant to general because desire depends less on objective value and more on maintaining momentum. Human beings constantly create new goals because achieving the final goal would force confrontation with emptiness. If you have nothing to chase, why even bother waking up? For most of human history, survival still required direct engagement with reality. We had to hunt, we explored, we developed craftsmanship, storytelling, ritual, and physical labor. Human beings remained psychologically connected to the world around them because existence demanded our participation. But technology changed this relationship. Modern civilization increasingly strips life of meaningful experiences while replacing them with artificial convenience and passive stimulation. Human beings became spectators rather than participants in their own reality. The more technologically advanced society becomes, the more spiritually disconnected people become from existence itself. He described this as a kind of spiritual unemployment. Our deepest human capacities slowly become unnecessary. Navigation becomes obsolete because machines guide us everywhere. Memory weakens because information is externalized. Physical craftsmanship disappears into automation. Exploration becomes simulation. Even social interaction becomes mediated through screens and algorithms. Each technological advance solves practical problems while simultaneously narrowing opportunities for psychologically meaningful engagement with reality. Zapfa believed this produces an invisible form of impoverishment. The easier life becomes materially, the harder it becomes existentially. And it's strange that Zapfa wrote about this in the 1930s, because while I was reading it, I would have sworn he was talking about the present. I guess this shows that some things really never change. An airplane mapping an unknown landscape may increase efficiency, but it also removes the profound human experience of discovering that landscape through struggle and effort. Convenience steals the intensity from life. Friction disappears, but meaning often disappears with it. Modern society now surrounds people with unprecedented comfort, while rates of anxiety, depression, alienation, and psychological emptiness continue to rise. Zapfa would likely argue that this is not accidental. Human consciousness evolved in conditions of challenge, uncertainty, danger, and direct engagement with the world. Modern civilization replaces those experiences with abstraction, simulation, and distraction. The human mind receives constant stimulation, but very little in the way of existential nourishment, and technology continues moving further in this direction. Today, human beings increasingly form emotional relationships with artificial systems. Social media algorithms simulate social importance. Digital entertainment simulates achievement and adventure. AI companions simulate intimacy and understanding. These experiences produce real emotional consequences despite emerging from fundamentally artificial structures. A person can feel genuine loneliness from being ignored online, genuine validation from digital approval, genuine attachment to a machine that possesses no consciousness whatsoever. Zapfa's theory becomes deeply unsettling in this context because it suggests modern technology may be accelerating humanity's separation from an authentic reality. Instead of confronting existential suffering directly, society creates increasingly sophisticated distractions capable of occupying consciousness indefinitely. In other words, civilization industrializes the suppression mechanisms that Zapfa described. The result is a culture permanently saturated with stimulation but increasingly starved of meaning. People scroll endlessly through entertainment while feeling emotionally numb. They consume infinite information while struggling to feel connected to reality. They maintain hundreds of digital relationships while experiencing profound loneliness. Modern civilization appears hyper-connected from the outside, yet internally fragmented, because according to Zapfa, distraction can suppress existential awareness temporarily, but it cannot resolve it. And the more sophisticated the distractions become, the more fragile people may become when it stops working, because eventually, inevitably, silence returns. As existential pressure increases, civilization adapts by lowering the level of awareness required for daily life. Mass entertainment, endless distraction, anti-intellectualism, and compulsive stimulation all serve the same function. They reduce the intensity of consciousness so individuals can continue functioning inside a fundamentally unbearable reality. He described this as a kind of collective psychological regression. Human beings gradually lose the capacity for deep reflection because reflection itself becomes dangerous. Society rewards productivity over contemplation, speed over depth, stimulation over stillness. The individual who constantly distracts themselves appears healthy and socially integrated. The individual who dwells too long on existence risks isolation and despair. Zapffe argued that suppression is so continuous, so deeply woven into ordinary life, that people mistake it for normalcy itself. And this creates a very strange inversion. What we call mental health may often mean successful adaptation to existential avoidance. The person who functions efficiently inside society is frequently the person most capable of suppressing their own awareness. Meanwhile, moments of existential crisis are treated purely as dysfunction, rather than possible encounters with reality. Of course, Zapffe wasn't romanticizing suffering. He wasn't claiming that despair automatically reveals the truth to us. His argument was more worrisome than that. Human beings may require illusion to remain psychologically stable at all. The structures protecting consciousness from collapse are not optional luxuries. They are survival mechanisms. Without them, existence itself may become intolerable. One of Zapffel's harshest criticisms was directed at humanity's belief that we are destined to conquer nature. Modern civilization often treats human dominance as evidence of evolutionary superiority. We build cities, we manipulate ecosystems, we engineer technologies, and we have reshaped the planet itself. Humanity behaves as though consciousness has elevated us above the rest of life. Zapffe believed the opposite. He saw human beings as deeply alienated from nature because consciousness severed us from the instinctive harmony that other animals still possess. Animals remain embedded within existence. Humans try to place ourselves outside of it, observing reality from a distance, unable to fully participate in the unconscious flow of life anymore. We became self-aware enough to separate ourselves psychologically from nature itself. And so, humanity attempts to compensate through conquest. We dominate landscapes, extract resources, industrialize ecosystems, and transform the planet according to abstract human desires. But beneath this drive lies something insecure. Human beings seek control because consciousness makes reality feel unstable and threatening. The more powerless we feel existentially, the more aggressively we attempt to control the external world. Zapffe believed this delusion of conquest only deepens our suffering. Technological progress creates temporary feelings of mastery while simultaneously destroying the natural environments that once grounded human existence psychologically. Civilization expands outward while individuals become increasingly fractured. The modern world often celebrates total control over nature as progress, but Zapffe saw something tragic in it. Humanity is trying to conquer nature because it no longer feels like home to us. We are conscious enough to proclaim ourselves as separate from nature, but still biologically dependent on it. We stand between animal instinct and abstract self-awareness, fully belonging to neither. This creates a permanent psychological tension. The more civilization advances, the more disconnected people often become from direct existence itself. Artificial environments replace natural ones. Digital systems replace embodied experience. Human beings increasingly inhabit symbolic worlds constructed by language, ideology, technology, and media, rather than reality as it actually exists. And beneath all of this remains the same unresolved awareness. death still awaits. Meaning still remains uncertain. Consciousness still cannot fully reconcile itself with existence. Most philosophies and religions treat consciousness as something sacred. Humanity is often described as the awakening of the universe, the highest expression of life, the culmination of evolution. Unsurprisingly, Zapfa rejected this entirely. He believed consciousness is closer to a cosmic accident than a divine achievement. Evolution is blind. Mutations emerge without any kind of intention. Humanity simply happened to evolve a form of awareness capable of recognizing suffering far beyond what any organism can comfortably endure. In this sense, consciousness resembles a tragic mutation. Nature produced a creature able to perceive its own fragility too clearly. This is why Zapfa's philosophy feels fundamentally different from ordinary pessimism. He was not merely claiming that life contains suffering. Nearly every philosophy acknowledges suffering in some form. Zapfa's argument is more radical. The structure of human consciousness itself may be incompatible with psychological peace. We became aware enough to recognize death, chaos, isolation, and impermanence, but still biologically driven to survive as if those truths did not exist. Human beings are pulled in two opposite directions simultaneously. Biology demands an attachment to life. Consciousness reveals that there is nothing solid to attach to. And so existence becomes internally divided. The human mind longs for permanence inside a universe defined by its impermanence. It seeks meaning inside apparent indifference. It craves certainty where none can fully exist. According to Zapfa, this tension can never be completely resolved, which leads to the terrifying implications at the center of The Last Messiah. What if humanity's greatest achievements are not signs of transcendence, but symptoms of a species struggling to escape awareness itself? Zapfa's theory did not emerge in isolation. It belongs to a long tradition of thinkers who suspected there was something fundamentally tragic about consciousness itself. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer argued that human life is driven by an endless, insatiable force that he called the will. People constantly desire, strive, pursue, and suffer because satisfaction never lasts. Fulfillment immediately dissolves into boredom, and boredom generates new desire. Existence becomes an endless oscillation between craving and dissatisfaction, and Zapfa took this insight further. For Schopenhauer, suffering emerged from desire. For Zapfa, suffering emerged from awareness itself. Consciousness exposes human beings to realities no organism can peacefully integrate. Desire, fear, ambition, and despair are all consequences of a much deeper wound. Buddhism arrives at a strangely similar conclusion through a completely different path. Buddhist philosophy argues that attachment to existence creates suffering because all things are impermanent. The ego clings to stability in a world defined by constant change. Human beings suffer because they resist the transient nature of reality. Zapfa would likely agree, but with one crucial difference. Buddhism generally presents liberation as possible. Through enlightenment, meditation, detachment, spiritual practice, suffering can be transcended. Zapfa was far less hopeful. He believed that consciousness itself traps humanity inside of existential contradiction. Even attempts to escape suffering become expressions of consciousness struggling against itself. Modern thinkers like Thomas Metzinger echo aspects of this view. Metzinger argues that evolution produces enormous amounts of unnecessary suffering through blind biological processes. Consciousness didn't emerge because the universe intended wisdom or beauty, it emerged because certain cognitive structures improved survival temporarily. And for the record, survival doesn't care about happiness or peace. Evolution rewards reproduction, adaptation, and persistence. It does not optimize organisms for existential peace. This is why consciousness may feel fundamentally unstable. Human beings inherited ancient survival instincts designed for immediate threats, then layered abstract self-awareness on top of them. The result is a mind capable of imagining infinite futures, replaying past humiliations endlessly, and contemplating cosmic meaninglessness while still responding emotionally like a vulnerable animal, a creature caught between instinct and abstraction. Zapffe imagines a final prophet emerging among humanity, a last messiah who sees existence clearly and fully understands the tragedy of consciousness. Unlike religious messiahs who promise salvation, this figure offers something entirely different. He strips away illusions instead of comforting them. The last messiah looks upon humanity and recognizes that people are trapped inside of a condition that they never chose. A species burdened with awareness too heavy for life to carry peacefully. And so, he delivers his final message. Know yourselves, be unfruitful, and let there be peace on earth after your passing. It is one of the bleakest conclusions in all of philosophy. There is no hope, no escape, and nothing to cling to. Zapffe believed the compassionate response to existence is to simply refuse to perpetuate suffering indefinitely. If consciousness itself creates anguish, then reproducing consciousness becomes ethically questionable. This is why Zapffe is often associated with antinatalism, the belief that bringing new conscious beings into existence imposes suffering unnecessarily. But even here, his philosophy is more tragic than hateful. Zapffe didn't despise humanity. If anything, he viewed human beings with immense sympathy. We are creatures trapped by an evolutionary accident, desperately constructing systems to survive psychologically, while sensing, somewhere beneath awareness, that none of them fully solve the problem. Human civilization becomes tragic precisely because it is understandable. People distract themselves because consciousness hurts. They pursue status because stillness feels dangerous. They cling to identities because uncertainty terrifies them. They consume endless entertainment because silence reveals too much to us. And perhaps most disturbingly, they often do all of this unconsciously. What makes Zapffel's theory so disturbing is not merely its pessimism. It is the possibility that parts of it already feel true. Most people have experienced moments where the normal structure of life suddenly feels fragile. Maybe late at night, during grief, isolation, or just moments of silence, when distraction temporarily disappears. Careers, social roles, online identities, ambitions, arguments, trends. For a brief second, they all seem strangely theatrical, as though humanity is collectively acting out a play to avoid confronting something deeper. And then the moment passes. The phone lights up and consciousness narrows again. Humanity exists in a constant state of managed distraction, and perhaps that is the most unsettling part of all. Zapffe forces us to consider the possibility that the modern world is not malfunctioning accidentally. The endless entertainment, the compulsive productivity, the addiction to stimulation, the obsession with status, the fear of silence, these may not be cultural mistakes. They may in fact be psychological necessities, because if consciousness truly is an evolutionary excess, then distraction is not weakness, it's survival. Human beings often imagine consciousness as illumination, the moment the universe becomes aware of itself. But Zapffe asks us to consider a darker possibility. What if consciousness is less like enlightenment and more like overexposure? A flame burning too brightly inside a fragile biological organism. A mutation powerful enough to comprehend reality, but too powerful to live comfortably within it. And so humanity continues forward exactly as it always has. Building civilizations, inventing technologies, creating religions, chasing ambition, falling in love, consuming distractions, searching endlessly for any kind of meaning, all the while carrying, somewhere beneath all that noise, the unbearable awareness that one day every thought, every memory, every achievement, and every human being will disappear. And perhaps the strangest part is this. Tomorrow morning, me, you, all of us watching this right now, will wake up and continue living anyway.